Hey, welcome back, everyone. We're in the middle of a conversation I called it Three Threads, and I have three threads. You'll have to go back to my previous videos to see what these biblical themes represent, what the threads are. But today I want to introduce a fourth thread, the yellow thread. So let's jump in. I will pull some slides up here and let's just for a quick review. What are these red, blue, and green threads before I introduce the yellow? The red thread is Jesus Christ. Jesus comes to earth as a king. The first time he comes with a crown of thorns, and he will come back one day to rule on earth. This is before heaven. He will rule on earth as an earthly king. He's the red thread. The blue and the green are tied together. The blue is the nation of Israel, a continuous thread all the way from Genesis to Revelation. And the green thread is the land of Israel, the actual geography. Here's the land of Israel today. And so here's an example of a passage that includes the red, the blue, and the green together. You'll see God is telling Abraham that I'm going to make you fruitful. I'll make you into nations, and kings will come from you. That's the red thread. Kings will come from Abraham, a line of kings, and Jesus will be the eventual king that comes through that bloodline. Verse 7, God says, I will establish my covenant between me and you and your offspring. That's the 12 tribes of Israel and the nation of Israel. Again, go back to previous videos to really go deeper into what these threads are about. And then finally, verse 8, God says, I'll give to you and to your offspring the land as an everlasting possession, the red, the blue, and the green. But, something is missing from this story, from these themes. And what's missing are the nations, all the nations outside of the Israelites. That's what the yellow thread is. And this, God has a special promise and a special role for the Israelites, but he also includes blessing and inclusion for the nation. So let's look at that. Going all the way back to Genesis, in the Abraham covenant, tucked in that verse 3, are the nations. God says, I will bless those who bless you, speaking to Abraham and his descendants. And him who dishonors you, I will curse. So we've talked about that. But then he says, and in you, all the families of the earth shall be blessed. So through you, Abraham, all of the nations outside of your specific line, the nation of Israelites, outside of that, all the nations will be blessed one day. Jump over to the Galatians, from one G to another, from Genesis to Galatians on the other side of the Bible. Apostle Paul basically quotes that same Abraham covenant. He quotes the promise here you see in blue. This is God speaking, but Paul is restating it. In you, again, the blue thread, the Israelites, in you shall all the nations be blessed. That's the yellow thread. All the nations will be blessed through Abraham. So then those who are of faith are blessed along with Abraham. Again, the nations are very much part of the Abraham covenant. We've been talking about Israel for the last several videos, but it does not exclude the nations that would come. Peter was the first to really get the revelation that the gospel is going to be opened up to the Gentiles. That's to the non-Jews. So the gospel was opened up broadly. And Peter says, truly, I understand that God shows no partiality. But in every nation, anyone who fears him and does what is right is acceptable to him. That's the yellow thread. Notice the yellow thread. Notice the language of nations. It's really all throughout the Bible. Here's an example of a passage. I won't read it all, but a passage that includes the red, the blue, the green, and the yellow thread all converging in a beautiful way. And at the top, you see where Peter says, and we are witnesses. That's the blue thread. That's the Jews. Peter's saying, we are witnesses of all that he did, of all that Jesus did. That's why that's the red thread, both in the country of the Jews and in Jerusalem. That's the green thread. So you see how I use these colors to bring out these themes so that we can understand how these themes are staying connected and they have continuity throughout the scriptures. And then down at the bottom, when Peter says that everyone who believes in him receives forgiveness of sins through his name. So now everyone can share in this great blessing. I'm just going through some passages. There are so many more, and all I want to do is introduce the idea of the yellow thread. But here's another passage in Romans where Paul says, is God the God of the Jews only? Blue thread, Jews. Is he not the God of the Gentiles also? Yellow. Yes, of the Gentiles also, yellow thread. Since God is one who will justify the circumcised, that's the blue thread, by faith, and the uncircumcised, the yellow thread, through faith. So you see how that works. You see, I think as you read the Bible now, your eyes will be in tune to spot the significance of nations when it talks about nations, or of the Jews when it talks about the Jews. And so this brings us to this big point. Does this distinction still continue today? Is there still a distinction in God's eyes between the Jews and the Gentiles? And so I touched on that briefly in the last video, but I want to show you that in Revelation, there still is this separate treatment, these separate identities of the Jews and the Gentiles. It's very special. In Revelation 7, John gets this revelation from Jesus Christ, and he hears an angel. An angel says, do not harm the earth or the sea or the trees until we have sealed the servants of God on their foreheads. And then I heard a number of the sealed, 144,000 sealed from every tribe of the sons of Israel. So here's this voice saying, before judgments are unleashed on the earth, before this great tribulation period, that's what this is speaking of. And Jesus speaks of it, calls it the time of Jacob's trouble. So this is a great, horrendous time of tribulation. But God is setting apart 144,000 of the Jewish race, the Jewish line of people, to protect them, to deliver on his promise that he is going to bring them through this tribulation period. In fact, if you go to the next few verses, it shows God sets apart 12,000 from each of the 12 tribes. And there it lists the tribe of Judah and Reuben and Gad and Asher and so on. And these 12 times 12 are the 144,000. Blue thread, these are the Jews that are set apart from the nations during this time in the future. Pretty special. But if we go a few verses further, next verse actually, John says, after this I looked, and behold, a multitude that no one could number, from every nation, from all the tribes and peoples and languages. So that's the yellow thread. That's the nations. What's happening in Revelation is John is sort of getting this series of visions, almost like a documentary. And he looks here and he sees one thing. He looks here and he sees one thing. He looks over here and he gets another vision. It's not necessarily chronological all the way through. So you do bounce around. But what's important for us to see is that the nations have separate identity from the Jewish people, even in the end times. And so that's why you see the yellow thread. They're standing before the throne, and this is a flash. This is a shot in heaven where they're standing before the throne and before the Lamb. That's the red thread. That's Jesus Christ. So John sees the nations, those who have already gone up into heaven, that have died, that have probably been martyred during the tribulation. And so that's what he sees. I want to show you one more in Revelation. Just again, I want you to see the theme that the Jews, the blue and the yellow have separate treatment. Revelation 14, then I looked, and behold, on Mount Zion. Mount Zion is the name given to Jerusalem during the millennial kingdom. So when Jesus comes back, on Mount Zion, that's the green thread, stood the Lamb, that's Jesus, the red thread. And who's with him? The 144,000 who had his name and his father's name written on their foreheads, the blue thread, the Israelites. That's God's promise. In the end, he is going to deliver safely a remnant, a first fruits remnant of the Jews into the millennial kingdom. That's been the promise all along, that he was going to get the Jewish people into the land, Mount Zion, where Jesus will come and reign. And this is what John sees. And what about the yellow thread? There it is, the next few verses. Then I saw another angel flying directly overhead with an eternal gospel to proclaim to those who dwell on earth. And now this includes to every nation and tribe and language and people. So there you go. That's a quick, fast run through, but I just want your eyes to be tuned in to the yellow thread, the fourth thread. I called it the 3-thread series, but really it's this special fourth thread that includes all the nations that will be blessed through the original Abraham promise. I have more to share, so continue to check in. And by the way, don't forget, I have a document that I have updated. So go to this document. I will include a link in the description to this video. But as you can see at the top, it says the yellow highlights for the Gentiles. That's the fourth thread. So if you scroll through the document throughout, you will see some yellow highlights that speak to the nations. This is a work in process document. I'm still dropping stuff into it, but I'm updating it for you to access and to help you as you're reading through the Bible to see these 4 themes. Thanks again for watching. I'll check in later.